Hi, my name is Muhaddisa Sawari, and I'm a second year political science student at UBC. My family and we are Hazaras from Afghanistan, so my family had to escape the violence and find a home somewhere else. But me and my siblings, we kind of grew up all over the place. We grew up in Pakistan, in Iran, and eventually in 2015, my single mother and my siblings, we decided to move to Indonesia. And although that may seem like kind of a random choice, it's because Indonesia is one of the few countries with a UNHCR office inside of it. So my family and I were able to register as asylum seekers under the UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So while we were able to stay in Indonesia, we were kind of under the UNHCR. So we were there for an indefinite period of time. We kind of didn't know where we would end up going. We didn't know how long we would stay there, but we just knew that temporarily that is where we had to live. And so when I first moved to Indonesia, I kind of thought of it as like an exciting adventure. You know, I was in this whole new country. I was excited to meet new friends, go to a new school. But unfortunately, refugees in Indonesia are actually not allowed to attend school, to have employment, or any kind of basic human rights. And that would have been okay if refugees had a set amount of time and if they knew how long they were going to stay there so that they could prepare or they would just know what's going on. But the biggest problem was we didn't have any of these rights, but we also had no idea how long we were going to stay in Indonesia for. So we were just kind of living and hoping for the best and placing all of our hopes in the UN and hoping that someday we could get resettled to a third country. And the craziest part is for me and for any other refugees who were in Indonesia, it did not matter where we went or which country we were sent to, which city. What was so important is that we could escape and we could find a home somewhere where we felt safe and where we felt like we had the right to go to school. We had the right to become who we want to become. I think in a lot of situations, people just end up finding resilience when they need it the most. And in the same way, in Indonesia, a lot of the refugee community came together and decided to create this little makeshift school. And this refugee learning center was a school that was kind of just a house rented in a little neighborhood. The parents came together, a bunch of the community members came together because they knew that their children were not able to go to school. They were barred from having an education and their future was completely unknown, indefinite, and they had no idea what was going to happen. So naturally, they decided to do whatever they could, rent this house, bring kids together, and do whatever they could to kind of give them something to do and give them a place to grow, a place to make friends, a place to like see each other. That school kind of became like my second home. It became a place that I went to 4 days a week. I had three subjects. My teachers were just volunteers, like a couple years older than me. Even though it doesn't sound like the fanciest, most equipped school, it was everything to me and hundreds of other refugee kids. When I first went to Indonesia, I would sit inside my home and I would watch outside the window every morning around 7 o'clock when all the Indonesian kids of the neighborhood would come together and they would be talking and giggling and chatting and all wearing their backpacks and their uniforms and going to school. And all I could really do was watch because I wasn't allowed to go to school. And so in my 12-year-old mind, I was like, why can't I just follow these kids and go to their school? Why am I so different? What makes me so different? At the time, I didn't understand the complexity of it and the situation that I was in and the fact that we were refugees and the fact that there were laws prohibiting us. All I really cared about was just being another kid and just going to school and making friends and playing sports. It kind of felt like the kids that went to this school and my classmates were the only people in the world who truly knew what it was like to be me and what it was like to live my life because again we were in the exact same boat. So the funny things about the center is that there was no exact age limit and that we technically, I think we had 6 to 8 grades and these grades weren't separated by age like it is here. It was separated by just like education level and skill level. From the ages of about 10 to 14, I'd never stepped foot into a real school. And as you can imagine, those are some very, very developmental years for any other young person. But for me, as weird as it sounds, even though I didn't get to have the access to the most prestigious and advanced education, I felt like I learned so much and I grew so much just from being in that environment of being surrounded by so many other kids from different places and just learning to survive on your own and kind of like be creative and find other ways to like make up for the things that you may have missed out on. I think the most special thing about the refugee students in that school was that even though in this part of the world you often see kids trying to like excuse their way out of doing extracurriculars or sports or school and classes, it was a complete opposite for everyone there. because we had that lack and that absence of like classes and sports and different extracurriculars, we wanted to do whatever we could do. So one of the two sports that were specifically kind of offered in Indonesia for us refugees was taekwondo and futsal, which is indoor soccer. And I was so passionate about both of them. I would like go to one class, I would run all the way down to the other one, and me and all my friends did the exact same thing. And so I kind of missed that kind of motivation I had all those years ago. I'm like, where did that go? When you take something away from someone, that only makes them want it even more. And that's something that was so, so exciting for me because I wanted to do everything because there wasn't much to do. There wasn't much to experiment on. So whatever there was, I wanted a piece of it. We ended up staying for 5 years in Indonesia, and my family was actually one of the few very lucky people who were even able to leave, when who were able to stay as a family and get resettled to a third country. And the country ended up being British Columbia, Canada. In fact, the whole culture in the school was that every single time someone got resettled to a third country and they got their tickets and they were ready to go, the whole school would kind of get together like an assembly. You would call up the student and the family in front of the whole school, and they would get a certificate. They would like give a little speech and give like a little farewell if we're about to leave. And that wouldn't happen often because very few people even got to leave. It was a very rare occurrence. But all of us would kind of like get huddled up on the carpet in like the living room of the school, and we would just watch with awe at the kid that was so lucky enough to finally be able to leave and finally be able to go to a safe country where they could have a real education and do whatever they could. And that's one of the core memories that I remember from that school, is being able to sit there. And it's kind of bittersweet because you're sitting down knowing that there is kind of uncertainty in your future, but you're so proud and so excited for that person in front of you who you sat next to in class for years, but they're finally able to go and leave and achieve their dreams. So that was really special. And that's also when my family were able to leave Indonesia. That's one of the things that happened, is that we had that little assembly, and I was so emotional, way more than I thought I would. I thought I would be very, very excited to go. And like, I'm sick of this place, let's go. But honestly, I was very, very sad. It was so emotional because of this place is like, it wasn't just a school, it's an institution that I would just go to, come back home to. It kind of was very intertwined in my daily life and intertwined in my identity as a refugee, was that I was a refugee in this country. I didn't have access to education. So the fact and the act of showing up to school every day was extremely special to me, and it meant so much more to my entire identity as a refugee from Afghanistan. We landed in Canada when it was snowing. So it was in the middle of November, and it was so, so special. It's a completely different universe from Asia because it was way colder. It was so nice, and the people were different. Everything was different. And I think there's something so special about that little moment of arriving in a new environment where you're just like giddy about everything. Everything is exciting. Everything is new. And everything is just an opportunity to learn and explore. And that's, I think, one feeling that I'll miss the most, because I'm so lucky that finally it feels like after all these years of my life of like moving and switching homes, I'm finally able to be settled in a place where I feel like I'm home. One of the biggest things is that for people in the West, often hearing the word immigrant or refugee is very associated with the news and seeing them in articles and headlines. And I feel like what's missing is that aspect of humanization, is to see that these people that you always hear about in the news aren't just numbers. They aren't just these clumps of people who act the exact same way, who have the exact same goals. There's a lot of negative stereotypes and very harmful images that are kind of just portrayed on top of refugees, which is absolutely not true. They kind of forget that these people do have unique identities and have unique goals, and they're people just like you, and that it's not fair for them to be clumped together as a group, and it's not fair for people to see them as like a monolithic identity. I think that's one of the things, is that assuming and clumping all refugees together and forgetting that these people who have very unique lives, and there's people who have unique stories, and most importantly, refugees are extremely resilient, and that even though to you it may seem like not much work to leave your home and be able to settle somewhere else, it is extremely, extremely difficult and heartbreaking to know that you aren't able to return to your homeland for things that are outside of your control. Every single person in this world could have ended up a refugee. It's just some of us were unlucky to be born in a place that isn't safe for us, and some of us were unlucky to be born in a place that wouldn't give us a good and healthy and positive life. I think empathy is one of the most important things that's missing, is putting yourself in that person's shoes and understanding that just like you, as a person who loves their family, as a person who has dreams, as a person who wants to grow as an individual, as a person who was once a teenager, who once had these silly ideas of dreams in life, just like you, they've had the exact same thing. And I think that aspect of empathy and humanizing refugees is one thing that's extremely important but missing. I think to me, resilience means acknowledging and accepting where you come from, who you are, and refusing to let these labels that were put onto you define you, and refusing to let the situation that you were born into define you, and to have that fire in you to keep going and to make the most of whatever you were given. Because, like I mentioned before, you were just born with a certain deck of cards and you can't do anything about it. So, I think what's important about resilience is learning to accept who you are and where you come from and learn to grow from it and doing whatever you can to make the most of what you have. I think one of my core values that always keeps me going is the fact that higher education or even a high school education for a lot of people in this part of the world is kind of like a given. It's a right, it's kind of like a box to take off on a checklist. But for someone like me, a girl from Afghanistan, I think education is an act of resilience and it's an act of rebellion almost. And I think that's what makes it so much more special to me, is that I come from a place where education is unfortunately not a right and it's not something that's accessible to girls and for women. And so for me, what's important is acknowledging that fact and knowing that every single day that I get to do such mundane things like show up to my lecture and do my test and have discussions with my classmate, that is the biggest privilege that you could bestow to any girl from Afghanistan. And I think that's one of the most important things to me, is every day I wake up with the fact that I am living someone's dream. And in fact, I'm living my own dream from a couple of years ago. Every single day that I get to do things that are understandably boring or mundane for any other student is me living my dream actively. Is to be able to go to a school that provides me with all the amenities and the resources that fit my needs, but also allow me to grow exponentially and allow me to explore a whole new world of education and knowledge that I would have never had access to otherwise. So education is absolutely a privilege, and it's even more of a privilege to be able to do that in UBC, in a place where I feel welcome and safe. And what drew me to political science specifically is coming from a country that's notorious for overstepping human rights, overstepping women's rights. I always grew up watching the news, and admittedly, maybe a little too young to be watching the news. But honestly, I think that's one of the things that kind of fueled my passion for wanting to understand politics and wanted to understand government, especially international politics, because I come from a country from a very different part of the world, a war-torn country, and now I get to live on the complete flip side of that in a first world, very privileged country. And so having these two very different dynamics, it fuels my motivation of wanting to study political science and understand that world. I think especially what's also important is that oftentimes in the news or within our schools and within our courses, we kind of get a very detached idea and knowledge. We kind of study people in a microscope from our lens and based on a very Western perspective. But for me personally, being from someone who is from Central Asia, who is from Afghanistan, and who has lived besides people just like myself, I kind of feel like I have that added perspective of a very real view on how these people live and how these governments and societies function. And so having that personal knowledge and background contrasted with the education that I have here, I feel like gives me a very holistic understanding. And I'm also very glad that we get so much space to discuss and express ourselves and share our ideas. And so doing that, I feel like is very, very special to me, because I get to engage with this very technical statistical knowledge with my personal experience and background. One thing that drew me to UBC the most is the aspect of inclusivity and also the very, very diverse student population. I think naturally, coming from a student like me who comes from a very unique niche background, I often feel isolated. That's how I felt in high school, is I often felt isolated and I felt like nobody could ever relate to me. I'm so different, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to find community, if I'll ever be able to find someone who can understand me truly. And so looking at how diverse and how inclusive UBC was and how diverse the student body was, that's one of the things that attracted me the most to UBC. I think it's a very important decision as a young person to choose a university that you want to go into, because you'll be spending the next 4 or more years of very core developmental years for you as a young adult. For someone like me from Afghanistan who has experienced a lot of discrimination and assumptions on my identity, it was super important for me to surround myself in an environment where I felt safe and I felt welcome and I felt understood. And I think UBC was definitely one of the places that came to my mind because it's made of such a diverse and large student body. It gave me comfort to know that if I were to choose UBC and live inside the UBC community, I would be able to find my people and I would be able to live in a place where I felt safe and I felt welcome. And fortunately for me, that's exactly what happened. And that's one of the bigger things that drew me to UBC is I really wanted some place that was accepting, welcoming, and inclusive of people like me. And that's exactly what UBC gave me. Every morning that I wake up, every day that I show up to class, I get that constant reminder that this is a privilege and this is something that I'm so grateful for. And this is the result of years of like birthday candle wishes and like prayers begging to God that one day I would be able to live in a safe country, be able to go to a university that is excellent at everything it does. And so it was very exciting and I'm immensely grateful for all the opportunities that I've gotten. And it's extremely true that it does take a village. Community is a huge part of my identity in Indonesia, in my entire life, in Canada, in my high school, in my university. And I think that's what makes it so special is to know that I'm able to achieve all my dreams and to know that I have a team of people behind me who support me, who look out for me, and who are going to congratulate me on my achievements and who are also going to give me a shoulder to cry on times where I need it the most. So Parastu is a project that myself and my older brother Abdullah are working on. I think what makes it special is that we have two very different but similar stories and perspective of being a refugee. Because when we were in Indonesia, my brother Abdullah, he was actually one of the co-founders of the refugee school. So he was kind of having that background of setting up the school, and he was the manager of the school for a couple years. He was an inspiration for me when I came to Canada to also have that same sense of community service and giving back because when I came to Canada as a refugee, there were so many different gaps that I felt like weren't filled. Again, like even very basic and simple questions that people would often ask their parents or their older siblings, I didn't really feel like I had that. And so I had this strong passion and drive for wanting to give to these other newcomers and refugees what I wished I could have had when I first came here. And so the goal of Parastu is to kind of raise awareness and advocate for refugees and their stories and their journeys and to pay homage to their resilience, but also specifically to give back to the refugee community and provide them with resources and support that they need the most. We're working on this project to be able to finally give back to the community that has done so much for us. And so it's exciting and weird to know that we're finally in a position where we're able to give back and use our knowledge and whatever resources that we have and share it with the people to make their lives hopefully a little bit easier than ours was in the beginning. But if I could tell my grade 10 self anything now, was to be that you don't have to force yourself to fit into a box that was never meant for you, and that you should always put yourself inside rooms and inside environments that feel welcoming towards you. And I think that's one thing that I would say to all refugee students, that it's not fair for yourself to be so harsh on yourself and to not give yourself the space to kind of understand and acknowledge where you come from and the hardships that you've been through. There's so many refugee kids who are like 12 years old who in those 12 years of their lives have gone through more hardship and more heartbreak than like adults have in their entire lifetimes. One piece of advice I would give is to always be open to listening and never being afraid to have conversations with people from all different perspectives and from all different parts of the world. I think it can even become dangerous for you to only listen to people who have the same exact beliefs as you, who have the same exact mindset as goals as you, and that even though a lot of times it may seem daunting or unproductive, it is very important for a young person's mind to kind of be able to engage with different people, even people who completely disagree with you. It's important for us to hear those perspectives, engage with them critically, and kind of give ourselves the opportunity to explain ourselves and implement our knowledge and our perspective and our worldview. I think another piece of advice would be to have courage and be bold, even in situations where it may seem a bit scary, or you feel like you're not the best fit person and that you have to wait for the perfect time and you have to wait for yourself to become the smartest, qualified person to speak on something. If you feel like you see injustice happening, if you feel like you have a passion for wanting to advocate and spread awareness, use that passion and don't be afraid of judgment or critique. Open yourself up to receiving those critiques. Just have courage. If you see something that you feel like you want to speak on, don't be afraid and don't shut yourself out. Be brave enough to point something out when you see it and call people out, because I feel like that's the kind of person we need in this world. Kind of send like a hopeful message to maybe other youth like me. Because this is something I wish I would have been told when I was just new to Canada, is to never sell yourself short. And my brother Abdullah always tells this to me, and he kind of drilled it in my head, and it worked. Never reject yourself before you get rejected by somebody else. And that's something I kind of struggled with, is always feeling like I'm never qualified enough and I'm not good enough, and I'm not the best person to do this. Be kinder to yourself and be proud of how far you've come and the challenges that you faced, because all the hardships that you faced don't make you any smaller or don't make you any less deserving of having good things. Those are the things that lift you up, and those are the things that empower you. If you don't come from the most privileged place, that's not something to be ashamed of. And in fact, you should take pride in your identity, and you should take pride in who you are and where you come from, and to always stay connected to your roots and never forget the people that helped you achieve your goals, and never forget the place that you came from.